Today we have a graphics card that was supposed to be the one. It was like supposed to be the Anakin Skywalker of AMD's GPUs. This lineup was the chosen one, except just like the movies, it ends up turning to the dark side and not giving us the value that we expected. And this is the GRE edition, the RX 9070 GRE 12 GB. Now GRE, I believe, stands for the Golden Rabbit edition, at least that's what it was for the 7900 GRE. However, unlike the 7900 GRE, this card has been really just segmented perfectly in between the 9060 XT and the 9070. And it makes it so that it's just really just nothing special. And that's what we're going to start showing you guys some results here side by side. But the biggest part that we have to talk about with this GPU is the price. I ended up getting this card for around 500 USD, and it was from Marco. He's always talks in the comments. He's a great friend of the channel, and he's just a great friend IRL too. And he ended up saying, look, this got released in Taiwan. You have to check it out. I really want to see a video with it. And I thought, well, I'll check it out, and afterwards I can always flip it in a gaming PC. But unfortunately, when it came in, I was really just like left a bit underwhelmed, especially if it's going to be around 500 USD. I think this card in previous reviews, when I was talking about the RX 9060 XT, I was hoping this is what the 9060 XT would be for around 350 USD. So maybe if this thing comes in at 400 USD, it will be a bit of a hit. But outside of that, I don't really see it being that great of a card, especially if it's coming closer towards 500 USD. Anyhow, you'll notice we've got a game up here already being tested, and this is Marvel Rivals, and at 1440p and also 4K, it's just slotting pretty much perfectly in between the RX 9070 and the RX 9060 XT. Now the difference between the 9070 GRE and also the 9060 XT, of course, is the VRAM there. But let's weigh up all the specs of this card. We'll take a little closer look at this on the spec sheet, as well as testing out a heap of other games right after today's video sponsor.
Do you need to get Windows 10 or Windows 11 activated and don't want to spend $200 or some other exorbitant price? Well, if so, today's video sponsor VIP SCD Keys has you covered. For as little as $15 using the coupon code BFTYC, you can get Windows 10 activated. For a little bit more, you can get Windows 11 activated too. Links in the description below to find out more.
Welcome back to Tech Yes City. Now, with the RX 9070 GRE, it's pretty much an Asia exclusive with this card, where I do believe there is kind of an alternative motive for AMD to release this to the Asian markets. And the biggest one for that is I do believe they need to get the drivers trained up, where I think if they release this card to the West, there would be a lot of complaints, where even in today's results, I saw some very odd behavior where VRAM wasn't being utilized as well as, say, the 9060 XT or the 9070. But on the flip side, it also caused massive stuttering. And that one game that was causing this, for instance, one game without even ray tracing on, was Final Fantasy 16. And basically at 1440p, it was doing okay. But as soon as we went up to 4K, it was almost like this card was either it was hitting a VRAM problem, or there was just specs on the back end that just wasn't allowing the card to have a smooth experience. And this just caused massive stuttering. I also restarted the game, and then I restarted the PC and restarted the game just to make sure nothing weird was happening there. But sure enough, this game was just absolute poo when I was benchmarking it at 4K. Even then, also tried lowering the settings to low at 4K, and the stuttering continues. And really the only thing to do if you had this GPU and you wanted to play Final Fantasy at 4K, Final Fantasy 16, the best thing would be to just hold out until there's a driver update for it, unfortunately. Though in terms of the 1440p performance, what we're seeing here is it's slotting beautifully, or not so beautifully because the value isn't that good, which we'll talk about later, but not so beautifully in between the 9060 XT and the 9070 16GB. Now moving on to a game like Cyberpunk, here is where at 1440p as well as 4K, it managed to again just slot almost perfectly in between that 9060 XT as well as that RX 9070. Now, for these particular benchmarks, we are going with new graphs here. I did revamp my graphs as well as the footage, the overlay that you're seeing on the screen here, because I just had a Sunday morning. I was just free all morning, and I thought, well, we might as well make a new look for the channel. So do let us know in the comment section too if you like this overlay that you're seeing with the numbers, the FPS that's hitting your screen. I think it's just really easy to read, at least when I was benchmarking, so hopefully it's easier for you guys to digest as well when we're looking at these numbers. Though for the next game here, we got Warhammer 40K Space Marine 2, and this game was smooth sailing at 1440p and 4K. There was nothing really out of the ordinary here, but do keep in mind with Warhammer in particular, I also do like to test the power consumption numbers here, and this is where the RX 9070 GRE really wasn't anything special. In fact, after looking at these numbers, I was unimpressed with the power efficiency here, where I personally liked the power efficiency of the 9070 much better than the 9070 GRE, but on that token, I actually think I even prefer the 9060 XT 16GB over that of the 9070 GRE. Ultimately, the inner cynic in me would have it believe that this is pretty low quality RX 9070 silicon that wasn't good enough for an RX 9070, and it's been repurposed as a 9070 GRE. Though on that note, if you decide to undervolt this card, which I heavily recommend you do, you are going to lose not so much performance, but you're going to gain back a heap of efficiency, but also you can decide to overclock this card too and gain some performance that way. I do think the default profile on this card in particular does make it so much more desirable. If you got this model for whatever reason, you would want to overclock it or undervolt it, just to go with either a much more efficient profile or of course get better performance out of the card. However, do keep in mind that pretty much all the RX 9000 series, as well RTX 5000 series cards, do undervolt and overclock accordingly. So if you're thinking, well, I'm going to get an RX 9070 GRE and it's going to be this amazing overclocking card, just keep in mind that you can overclock that amazing RX 9060 XT or that amazing RTX 5070 or whatnot. Though continuing on with the results here, we got Riftbreaker at 1440p. We saw here some pretty decent performance fitting right in between, yet again, the RX 9060 XT and the RX 9070. And of course, you're seeing in a lot of these titles also the RTX 5070, which we do have to pay particular attention to because that is coming in just a little bit over 500 USD. But in practically every scenario here, I actually do think in every scenario, it is outperforming the RX 9070 GRE, and it does have the same amount of VRAM, and it has been out longer on the market, so the drivers are more polished, and you're going to have a less stuttery experience. Though as you can see with these graphs, with Riftbreaker at 4K in particular, the RX 9070 GRE was starting to fall behind a little bit when it comes to the 0.1% lows in particular, and so even restarting the benchmark multiple times, this card was struggling slightly at 4K. Then move on with Black Myth Wukong at 1440p high settings. We saw here really good performance out of this card, again slotting right in comfortably between 9060 XT and the 9070. However, at 4K, it was experiencing, again, lackluster 0.1% lows, especially compared to that of the RTX 5070 or even the RX 9060 XT 16GB, which I feel like that's been on the market a little bit longer. Though moving on to a game like Fortnite here, we've got DirectX 12 epic settings. And what we're seeing with this card at 1440p and 4K is there's really no funny buggers here, but there is pretty much that slot for this card right in between, again, the 9060 XT and the 9070. Though we'll quickly go over some ray tracing numbers here, and here's where we had another problem in particular with Dragon Age Veilguard. And what I'm seeing with this game is, I've seen this in the past, it has been patched out on particular AMD cards, and especially the, I think it was the 9070 XT that got patched out in. I remember when I first tested the 9070 XT, it was kind of stuttering in this game with ray tracing on, but then it got patched and it was working fine. This is where the 9070 GRE is exhibiting the same symptoms as the XT did on those earlier drivers. Though with the ray tracing numbers overall, they didn't look too bad here. And some of the other games we're testing here, I know you're going to say especially the next two titles we're going to pull up, the ray tracing is abysmally low in terms of the FPS, and that is true. But what I'm looking for here in particular is just very unplayable behavior where it just goes right down to say 1 FPS or even chokes out at 0. But it was good to see in Cyberpunk as well as Black Myth at 4K max settings, none of this behavior occurred. But ultimately, if you're going for a ray tracing experience on the 9070 GRE, you definitely want to stop it down to 1440p, perhaps even turn on FSR or even the in-game upscalers, depending on the game, and get a much better experience. Though, here's where we're going to talk about the last part of today's video, and this is, of course, FSR 4 versus DLSS 4. Ultimately, from what I'm tallying up here with the 8 games that we tested, FSR 4 was officially only supported in 2 of the games as opposed to DLSS 4, which is working in 7 of the games, I believe. So currently at this point in time, DLSS 4 is definitely more desirable than FSR 4, but FSR 4, when it does work, it works incredibly well, as we're seeing with Warhammer Space Marine 2. I think that looks incredibly good with FSR 4 on, and the 9070 GRE performing quite well in this game makes it so that some titles, it does perform really well, but then we move on to the price, and this is where we're kind of going to segue into a conclusion here, where the 500 USD roughly that I paid, I think I paid a little bit more because I had to get it shipped to Australia. It makes it so that if I was to convert this to Australian dollars and compare it to what AMD has on the market here, it makes it so that, again, just like the benchmarks, this card is pretty much slotting right in between the RX 9060 XT 16GB and the RX 9070 16GB. But the worst thing about the RX 9070 GRE is the efficiency profile versus these other 2 cards that it's coming in between at, where it feels like it's just either a sloppy tuner or a sloppy piece of silicon, and or both, and it's really making it an undesirable card versus these other 2 cards that it's slotting in between, especially also the fact that we've got 12 gigabytes, and in the case of Final Fantasy, with the 12 gigabytes of VRAM in Final Fantasy at 4K, Final Fantasy 16, it was giving out this undesirable experience. And I do believe once AMD patches the drivers for Final Fantasy 16 in particular, it will play better. But when you're looking to get a card and then play the latest titles and have no problems with a day one driver, you're gonna have a much better chance of doing that on a 16 gigabyte card. And so at least in Australia, if I look at the pricing of roughly 550 Aussie dollars versus 850 Aussie dollars that I paid for it versus 1,050 Aussie dollars, it actually makes it so that the 12 gigabyte option is really undesirable versus these 16 gigabyte options that are already out there, at least locally where I'm at. And then if you were to go to the US for 500 USD, you've got the RTX 5070 for a little bit more, and that's much more polished and more efficient. And then you've got the RX 9070, which you can pick up roughly for 600 USD, give or take. So at 500 USD, this card really needs to see a cheaper price tag, in my opinion. It should be priced around 400 USD, maybe a little bit more expensive than the RX 9060 XT 16 gigabyte, because that's also got 16 gigabytes going for it too. The last thing is the Pulse model in general. Very solid card from Sapphire here. I had no problems in terms of noise or temperatures, and also the inputs and outputs are actually really handy. You've got 2 HDMI 2.1 outs as well as DisplayPort 2.1As. I think you got 2 of those as well. So you've got great connectivity there on the back of the card. And then when it comes to the length and width of the card, I can just show you guys that on the screen. Anyhow, with all that out of the way, I hope you enjoyed today's video on the RX 9070 GRE. And I guess, yeah, price is everything, right? This thing, no such thing as a bad product, only a bad price. And that's like, couldn't be said any better for this RX 9070 GRE right here, where 500 USD is complete miss. I hope this thing, if it does hit the West, it hits these shelves a lot cheaper than 500 USD. I would say it has to, at least as a maximum price point, be no greater than 400 USD. So $399, and I think I'd be pretty happy about it. But anything more than that, it's a miss. There's already pretty much better options out there at the moment. Though that's just my thoughts and opinions. Do let us know in the comment section below what you guys think of the 9070 GRE, and what do you think it should be priced at too. Love reading your thoughts and opinions as always. And with that aside, I'll catch you on the next tech video very soon. Peace out for now. Bye.